What's the biggest red flag during an employment interview? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. An employee offered to walk me out of the building after my interview and took the opportunity to basically warn me, in not so many words, about what the job really entailed. He was super friendly and diplomatic, just like he was making small talk, shooting the shoot with me. Then did they mention you'd get to do X? Because if you've got your heart set on that, you might be disappointed with the reality of the role, that kind of thing. Especially when he heard I was fresh out of college and would have had to move country for the job. Basically, the job ad was complete BS, and he was making sure I knew. I will be forever grateful to people like him. Answer, OMG, I had something similar. I interviewed to be an executive assistant, and the lady interviewing me basically told me if I don't have a thick skin, I'd have a hard time working for the boss, and that he liked to get to work early every day and expected his assistant to be there when he arrived. She told me the last girl didn't last long, BC. She wasn't a good fit, but I knew what she was saying. Either the girl quit or got fired, but it was BC, the boss wasn't jerk. I was so grateful I didn't take that job. Story 2. My recent interview with what I thought would be a dream job went like this. You know you're the 6th person we've tried to make this position work for, and we're starting to think it's us. Story 3. When I mentioned a company's dismal Glassdoor evaluations, they became so enraged that they ended the interview. Well, I suppose I escaped that danger. Answer. On the other hand, I've had some good luck bringing up a company's positive Glassdoor and Indeed reviews when the scores are considerably higher than expected. It's exceptionally rare for companies to post above a 4.0 without serious vote manipulation, and I've run across some companies with 4.85 and higher. Asking how the company managed to end up with such a high employee satisfaction score gets them talking about what people like about working there, and you can easily tell if they're bullshitting you. Story 4. They explain that you will for some reason not be an employee of the company, but an independent contractor that uses their facilities and is paid by them. Story 5. Dynamic, fast-paced environment. It's a mess. Management is top-heavy and supervisors are spread thin. You're on your own, learn fast. Story 6. Here's a few from my most recent interview. Bad-mouthed a current employee. Said I might be asked to work overtime. When I asked how often that might happen, she did not give me a clear answer. Emphasized being a team player and mentioned that some of their more dedicated employees have even come into work sick. Was not clear on where it'd be working or what the job site was like. When it emphasized needing employees who put the job first and not those who do their 40 hours and go home. Mentioned the current supervisor was on leave but did not know why. Couldn't answer how many other employees were working at the site. Asked me if I could start the very next day. Awati Tonedu mentioned that they just had someone quit due to being unable to handle working 60-hour weeks. Unfortunately, I was so desperate, so I took this job, and I currently work here. So far, there has been a ton of drama, but I've been able to fly under the radar for the time being. Since I was hired, 2 people have walked out. I needed my work uniform hemmed, and I was told during the interview that this would be reimbursed. That was a lie. Someone I trained with scraped a pole with a work vehicle while parking. It was honestly an honest mistake and not any kind of stupidity. She was suspended for a week and threatened with termination. I was written up for simply being in the car when it happened. My supervisor has had multiple fights with my manager, the person I interviewed with, and it got so bad my supervisor resigned. Today is her last day. One of my reliefs was over an hour late and showed up smelling strongly of plant substance. One of my coworkers disappeared while on the clock and drove 45 minutes away to buy plant substance. Found out that all of us, since my supervisor, despite having the same title, are all being paid different wages. Answer, I found out recently that I am the lucky one in my company. I'm a project manager and get paid $90K a year. I've only been working there a year. Another employee who is actually technically above me, who has been there for 5 years, is getting paid $75K a year. My boss wants me to take another position in the company that has the same base salary, but I would get commission, so I wanted to bring in a friend of mine to take over my position. My boss told me they would only pay her $65K, WTF. Story 7. The office has a break room with games, pool table, etc. that looks like no one has touched it in months. Answer. Every place I worked at tried to add a space like this, and the second anyone touched anything, the management would talk about how that person must not have enough work to do, and they can't believe this person isn't at their desk working. Same thing with anyone who touched a beer keg they put in. It was basically installed as a hiring tool for candidates to see so the company could say, we're new age and a cool company too. We're just like Google, and also try and give people false hope that the environment would add some piece of joy. Anyone with any sense working there knew to never touch it. Story 8. It's a salaried position with flex time. Basically, you will be working 50 hours a week and only be paid for 40. Don't you dare flex anytime though. Story 9. I've posted on this before, but one I don't see mentioned a lot is the eyes of the interviewers. I'm not talking about do they seem shifty or whatever. I mean, do the people you're talking to seem chill and well-rested? Or are their eyes bloodshot, dark circles under them? They seem exhausted. It's harder to tell on a Zoom interview, but you can look for it once you start to notice it. I've said no to companies based on this alone. If everyone in a company looks tired, it's because they are stressed out and/or working extra hours all the time. Big red flag. Answer. As an interviewer, I feel the need to weigh in on this. It is fantastic and valuable advice. I've been in management positions for years. I've conducted interviews for companies that are awful. Currently, I'm working at a company that I absolutely love and will likely stay at for the rest of my life. When I jump in the video call to interview someone, I'm generally wearing a hoodie and gym shorts. I'm smiling, relaxed, rested, and totally stress-free. Pay attention to the interviewer, Jariuris. Their body language will tell you everything. Story 10. We need you to start as soon as possible. They're way behind schedule and will be immediately asking you to work long nights, extra hours on systems you're not familiar with, and then they'll yell at you when shoot doesn't get done in time. On top of that, they're probably assholes in general. That's why they're behind schedule in the first place. They don't plan well, manage people well, or know how to handle their clients. Basically, we need you here as soon as we can get you means you're fudge. Or more accurately, they're fudge, and it's about to become your problem. Answer. They're way behind schedule and will be immediately asking you to work long nights, extra hours on systems you're not familiar with. Where I used to work, there was a guy who took a job at another company for a relatively specialized role. He onboarded in the morning, and they threw him onto a task that involved him working for over 24 hours straight. He was back within a few months. In fact, I think he ended up applying for the posting for his own replacement. Story 11. Bait and switch position, applying for one job, and the conversation begins with discussing a different job. Story 12. I find a good question to ask is about traffic, especially of people who aren't the interviewers. Is traffic bad when you come into the office? How about when going home? Often you find out when the average person comes and goes. If it is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., then you're doing good. If they say at 6 a.m. the traffic is light, and I go home at 7 p.m. and it's light then too, you know the job is bad. Story 13. In 2017, I interviewed to teach at a small community college. It was a day-long affair, and they showed me a video on the history of the school. The video was on VHS. Did I say it was in 2017? Story 14. Things have been added to the list of job duties, job description between your first and second interview. Also, beware when they want you cross-trained on everyone's job. That's so they can go on vacation, and then you'll do 2 jobs for the price of 1. Answer. I'd like to throw a counter to this and start by saying my boss is awesome. One time I showed up for my shift and coworkers were like, hey, X called in sick, so could you do that shift instead of your own? Meanwhile, my partner on the shift about shoot his pants because he would be working alone and wasn't his season. Since things unfortunately needed to be done, I worked my jerk off that night and ended up getting off 2 hours late. I texted my boss an emotional complaint that if this is ever the plan, I need to be told beforehand so I can at least come in early and knock out the easy tasks, or at least not have to sprint and deliver things while simultaneously answering phones and doing computer work. It was 12:50 at night, so my boss was so confused and said she would text me back in the morning. She sincerely apologized and promised it would never happen again, and was pissed at the people who ended up making that call. Turns out I forgot to clock out that night, so she used the timestamp from my text as the time I clocked out, but accidentally entered 12:50 instead of 00:50. In truth, I never spoke a word once I found out, so I don't know if it was truly an accident or if she just hooked me up with 12 hours of overtime as an apology. I like to think it was just because she's cool. I would work 2 jobs at once every day if it meant I got double the pay or added time to my clocking. In this case, I got 12 overtime on top of a 20 differential for working between 7 p.m. 7 a.m. Story 15. 4 rounds of interviews, unreasonably complex or time-consuming interview questions. If they make you do this much work for free just for the interview, they're showing you that they have no respect for work-life balance. Answer: I was looking for a job last year. One place I interviewed said that they had a take-home assignment. This was not like a coding or similar position, which I could maybe understand that type of skills assessment. This was an account management position. Client success. I'm not working for free. I thanked them for their time and withdrew my application. Story 16. Companies aren't family. Companies should allow salary discussions. Companies must not make gendered nor racial assumptions. They can't ask me whether or not I'll be having a family and consider me lost goods if I decide to build a family one day. Story 17. Beer fridges, ping pong tables, bring your dog to work days are usually a cover for a really shoot work environment, most likely recommended or brought in by HR to say they're doing something to improve morale. Story 18. I work as a recruiter. These are red flags when I'm onboarding new clients, usually leading to me not taking their job. 1. We are open to someone with less experience, or the compensation structure is heavily weighted toward performance incentives, an excuse to not pay the industry standard for a job. 2. Not being transparent about pay structure or benefits. 3. Having the same job open for a long time, or having high turnover for that position. 4. Insisting that candidates share what they are already making to structure their payoff of that. It's an illegal question in a lot of states and a shoot way to attract and retain talent nationwide. Some green flags. 1. We are open to someone with less experience and these personality traits, as in, we invest in our employees rather than we don't want to train or pay. 2. Transparency in all things, including hurdles the company is facing, long-term incentives, in the total scope of responsibilities. 3. High employee retention. 4. Salary negotiations based on experience and potential rather than what the candidate is already making. Oh, and if they don't have standards for their employees, will take anyone. Bad job or company is planning to sell soon. Story 19. 2 big ones for me. Either I'm being interviewed by HR or, and arguably worse, the IT director is present, but the HR person leads the interview. Both indicate a serious trust issue between the IT leadership and the rest of the company, either earned or just because the HR management is that uncomfortable with the tech and the people who keep it working. The other biggie, of course, is if you ask what they enjoy about working there and they have no answer prepared. When I had an interview with the IT director sitting like a statue in his chair, while the HR person literally read questions off some top questions to ask in an interview type website, or a document sheet cobbled together from a selection of such sites, I noped on out of there. Painting will answer. My current employer, I did one interview with an HR drone just to make sure I wasn't a mouth breather, I guess. Then the next one was with the IT director and the senior admin, whose team I would be on, as well as, to this day, I don't know how it was decided, 3 or 4 other IT team members who just sat in on the interview. Maybe just a personality check type thing. I mean, this is a bad cycle you can see here. If HR is hiring your IT staff for IT, then it's no wonder they aren't impressed with the IT dev. Story 20. The worst I've heard was we work as hard as we want to. I should have taken them at their word. Walked into a situation where we were owed over $1 million by our vendor. We had around a month to collect before the parent company would shut us down. I had no idea before I started. The project manager and general manager had no idea on how to wrap up these jobs to get paid. I was able to get just under $750K paid out, but I was still laid off. Story 21. We expect you to come in on short notice or stay late without additional pay. You need to do this because you love this and not because of the money. Story 22. I know you applied for X, but we don't have an opening. How about Y? I fudged this like this. I applied for X. I did not apply for Y. If I wanted Y, I would have applied for Y. Every time I've ever accepted Y, I ended up in a miserable position and realized why they had such an opening in Y and not X. Story 23. At PetSmart. In order to get you in the system, we will have to put you in as a cashier. Then after 2 weeks, you'll be in as dog trainer. They never took me off cashier, but I'd already quit my other cashier job, so I was stuck with them till I found a new job. I shouldn't have fallen for it, but I was a teenager and stupid. If they really were going to put you in that position, you'd start out with that position and the pay to go with it. Story 24. We don't allow any remote work, despite it being a position done entirely on internet-connected laptops and phones. We really pride ourselves in our team culture. Nobody gives a shoot about team culture. They want to get paid. You don't need a union because we're your family. Fudge run. But not before starting a union. Story 25. On which side? As the interviewer. The biggest red flag is if the candidate doesn't know anything about the company or the role they are applying for. While obviously they aren't going to know the ins and outs of the specific role, unless it's an internal candidate, they should at least know about the company and be able to articulate what about the company and role that made them apply in the first place. As the interviewee, mass turnover is a red flag. Companies or teams with high turnover usually have systemic issues which persist despite the change in employee makeup. Story 26. An older guy yells loudly and in a patronizing way to a worker in a back room while he was interviewing me. I told him, if that's the way you treat your employees, then I don't want to work here. Have a nice day. Story 27. The phrase, we wear a lot of hats here, means you are going to do anything they want. You will also be paid for the smallest hat you wear. Story 28. If they ask, when can you start during the first interview, probably means the job is shoot and they can't find anyone else to do it. Story 29. We're a fast-paced, work hard, play hard family that gives 110% while going the extra mile. Story 30. People emailing you from all hours of the day during the hiring process. When you know they're in your time zone, do they work 247? Stressing how fast-paced it is, saying it once is fine. When you ask what the training and onboarding will look like, and they make it clear that you're just on your own from day one. Not part of the interview, but if you look up people from the company and their turnover rate seems to be much faster than other comparable companies. When they stress flexibility with schedule, but it's a one-way street, you need to work all of your regular hours. Plus, anytime we tell you, you need to work more, regardless of notice. Answer. I work with a guy from Microsoft who sends emails at all hours of the day and night, but his email signature says something to the effect of, due to my family circumstances, I work a lot of odd hours. Please don't feel the need to respond immediately and get back to me when you can. In the normal course, if your work day, he's been an absolute straight shooter with us. Story 31. We have a really high turnover, so we're looking for someone who is looking to put down roots and stay a while. Story 32. Asking about your intimacy orientation or religious beliefs or other similarly personal questions. During the interview, they should only be seeking information that's actually relevant to the job at hand and would be an invasion of one's privacy otherwise. Story 33. Although it is against the law for us to order you to skip breaks, nobody around here does it, so be aware of that. Story 34. One-way video interviews. Any sort of process that attempts to use an AI tool to assess candidate quality, it's a bunch of pseudoscientific horseshit, and HR is rife with this nonsense. Story 35. We're like family. If you hear this, run. What they mean is you put up with their crap without getting compensated for it. Story 36. So, are you a Democrat or a Republican? First of all, I'm obviously not answering that shoot. Second of all, bye. This actually happened to me. I bailed. Story 37. I have a few. Having to meet with multiple irrelevant people. If my work does not impact yours directly, then we don't need to meet. Too many rounds of interviews. 2 is enough for most roles. The only time you should have a third interview is if it's senior management exec level asking you to do mock work. They are either stealing ideas or don't know what a bullshitter sounds like, talking so they need a presentation or other work sample to see. Offering OT straight time as a benefit? X. Yeah, I know your target salary is $90K, but if you factor in the $80K base and 10 overtime, you will be just under 90. Doesn't that sound awesome? No, I should not go into a job expecting to be working an hour of overtime most days in order to get the compensation I'm seeking. Story 38. Can you start tomorrow? I don't know why people just quit the job. We treat each other like family at this job. You will have to wear many hats here at the job. Probation is 90 days and we will do an evaluation if you are fit for full time. In the meantime, your contract, so there is no benefits for you till then. Story 39. If they say something like, at company we're a family I leave, I already had a family and I don't need another. Besides, what they mean by family is treat you like shoot and expect everything with nothing in return. Story 40. Asking if you're married, single, pregnant, etc. Those questions are illegal, and if an interviewer asks them, leave immediately. Story 41. Bad-mouthing the person who had the position prior. All I could think was, lady, I don't know you or the last guy that worked here, and I want no part of this. I won't work for mean people. Story 42. This will probably sound weird, but chair height. There's been a couple interviews where the seat I'm in is lower than the interviewers. I end up looking up while they're staring down. I've also found those interviewers overbearing. They're quick to correct my answers to questions and displays horrible body language. Story 43. Any terms like, we work hard and play hard, we're a family here, we're looking for a rock star, etc. Story 44. Was told all our people share their time, their talent, and their treasure with the community. After asking for an explanation, I was told, our CEO has identified charities that we all support financially. Everyone also volunteers at least one Saturday every month to work in a community project. Nope. Story 45. Everyone wants to work for me. Why should I hire you instead one of the other idiots out in the lobby? You probably want to hire someone else. They might put up with your bullshit. I won't. I got up and walked out. Story 46. I've worked in resort and property maintenance for 10 years, and the biggest red flag I've noticed is requiring that you bring your own tools. If they are too cheap to buy the tools needed to repair their own property, they are going to be cheap when it's time to ask for a raise. Story 47. I had an interviewer ask me if I could do an unpaid trial run of the job for a day and see if it was a good fit for me. They shut down a month later, LOL. Story 48. Being told that you must stay until the next lead shows up and takes over the production floor, that is if they ever show up. Story 49. My former place of employment insisted we definitely hire women while staring at my chest the whole time. Story 50. A company I interviewed with had generators outside to power the lamps and computers inside. They said they outgrew their last buildings and haven't turned on the lights yet. My immediate thought was, or you didn't pay your bills at the last few buildings. Story 51. I interviewed for a position as a school teacher, and the director wanted to do a fake scenario with me, which was fine at first. He was pretending to be a student who was upset about failing their exam and asked me to react. I was super calm at first and really felt like I was doing the right thing. But at some point, he got more agitated and started yelling at me, still doing the fake scenario. But he was taking it so far that, in reality, if that happened, I would have simply called security. I was almost scared he would punch me TBH. I just stopped the scenario by saying I didn't know what else he wanted me to say. I left shaken and really didn't want the job anymore. It would have been one thing if it was a real situation, but he was being so fudge unhinged that it threw me off completely. Story 52. You are expected to render overtime work, but you'll have no overtime pay. Run TF away. P.S. I'm a talent acquisition specialist. O and BTW, HR doesn't give a single FUF about employees. We simply exist to protect the company's interest. We will replace you if you decide to quit. Story 53. This will get buried since I'm so late, but fudge it. By far the worst one I've had, on a job I unfortunately accepted, was this company does not believe in being rewarded for staying at home. As such, all days you are away sick will be unpaid. This is illegal in BC straight up. Other amazing illegal shoot they did. Subtracting a percentage of your pay towards a vacation fund, which is supposed to be your paycheck when you go on vacation. Except paid vacations are the law here, so it was just wage theft. Lying to clients about the qualifications of employees, sending employees onto active provincial work sites without appropriate safety gear, equipment, or supervision, and not reporting injuries. Fired a guy because he was black, and some clients didn't like it. The company is TLC Solutions out of Vancouver, and the CEO's name is Sungbum Yu. Story 54. I once was asked what my parents did. Realized way too late that I should have just walked out of that interview. My mom struggles with her physical and mental health, but honestly, this should not be of any concern to my potential employer. Says nothing about me as a person. I felt weirdly violated by that interview. Story 55. When the interviewer tells you that she is quitting due to the managers being, and I quote here, complete fudge imbeciles. Thanks, but no thanks. Story 56. The opposite can be true as well. I worked at a place where most of the staff had been working together for over 25 years. Don't take the job. They have their jobs and work dynamic right where they want them. They will be an unbreakable clique and will be impervious to change. The bosses will have zero control of them, and you will be on the outs constantly. Been there. It is healthy for a company to have a 5-year turnover on most jobs. Story 57. I interviewed with a very small insurance company to be a part of their benefits team. I had just moved to a new city with my boyfriend, now husband, a 25-year relationship. I was still very green. Their VP knew I was a transplant and asked what brought me here. I should have said something more thought out, but being young, I said I had moved here to be with my boyfriend and start roots. The VP said, I see. So you chase boys to new cities. I can't see you being serious here. I told him that was incorrect and that me being there was very much planned. I ended up telling the HR department that I wanted to withdraw my application. I didn't want to work for a man or company like that. Story 58. I work a blue-collar job, and one thing I make sure to do in an interview is ask to take a tour of the shop. I'm looking for general conditions of the equipment and tool rooms. If the equipment isn't well maintained, that usually means they are not investing back in the company or the employees. Story 59. When they ask you a question about a moral issue, is it okay to lie and should they retain their job if they do? And then proceed to insist on a black and white answer as though the question is somehow not a vast sea of gray. Yeah, missed out on that sheriff's department job with my answer. But as a bonus, I pissed off that lieutenant to the point he shut down the interview when I presented the concept of context. He didn't realize talking to me condescendingly, like I was some idiot country bumpkin, would be answered in kind somewhere. Dude legit argued that the question was black and white and nothing else, right? Okay. Story 60. When I made it to the second to last interview for a job, one of the people interviewing me told me the manager had a strong personality. I had had some tough bosses, so I thought I could handle it. I lasted 1 week at that job because the manager was so rude and condescending and would often complain about other employees to me. The person after me also did not stay very long. Lesson learned. Story 61. We can get anyone to stay and saying it like people don't want to work these days. Glad I got out of there within 3 months. Story 62. When they ask a ridiculous question at the end like, what animal would you be if you had the choice? Or, how do you make a PBJ? I've only seen this when there's more than one interviewer, but it's a way to signal to the other interviewer that they won't be hiring you without tipping you off. Story 63. I was being interviewed by an attractive female boss. She stated that she has 3 openings. I nodded and said I know. There was a very awkward silence after that. Story 64. Haven't done a job interview in like 5 years, but there are 2 for me. What are your wage expectations? If a company doesn't have set rates for a position, that's a pretty big problem from the get-go. It's usually just a way for them to extract information from multiple candidates to see how much will be an appropriate amount to offer you after you're hired. You might say $130K, they might try and hire you at $120K after talking to everyone else. The other one is when they begin to ask about marital status and children. That's another one of these questions almost designed to see how little they can give you. People with children and unemployed spouses need a job sooner rather than later. Story 65. Asked to do a 6-7 hour test. It's obvious they wanted unpaid labor. Hell no pro tip. Never agree to do unpaid work or training. Your time is important and you should be compensated. Also illegal depending on your local laws. Story 66. It always bothered me when they did not do their homework to find out more about me. One job I applied for was the best company in America in what we did. They gave me a temperament test to take. They also ran a credit check, a background check, and a moving violation record check. In addition, they called all of my references. I also handed them some written references. As part of the interview, I met with several people who would be under and over me. I was there for 9 hours. I felt honored that they interviewed me and then was even happier when they hired me. The vice president of the company was the first person to interview me and the last person to talk with me. He was absolutely the best person I have ever worked under. He was very competent and humble at all times. He was completely honest with me in every communication and in the interview. It was a sad day when he died about 10 years ago. I never knew that he was a Stanford graduate until I read his obituary. Often he would ask me to help solve a problem. There were several times when he implemented my ideas and sent a note to the owner of the company and myself. A strange thing happened when I showed at the new job. He told me my former boss called him and told him something about me. He told me he did not believe any of it. Eventually I found out what it was, and it was not true. The man was angry that I left. Story 67. Is a direct family member of the owner involved with accounting? If so, things at work will not be as easy as if it were someone unrelated. Story 68. The interviewer being vague about what your job entails. Quite a lot of business owners do this to get more people in the door. That means you may be going for what you think is a packing and wrapping job and end up doing stuff like cleaning the toilets and being the manager's lapdog. Fudge that shooter. Story 69. Lowballing. I had a guy offer me 11 hour that was advertised online as minimum $14.50. Also asking if you're willing to take initiative or fill in where necessary. That's code for being understaffed and having shoot workers who will need you to do every job in the building. Story 70. There is a company that advertises on the radio in my area where they say to just show up, don't call first, and you don't need a resume. That strikes as a significant red flag to me. Story 71. They ask what church you go to. This was in the US, where I'm pretty sure that's not a legal question. Story 72. Not given an interview but immediate onboarding that had to be completed on my personal phone. A door-to-door sales position that offered up to $50K but would lose the position if failing to sell less than 6 contracts. I noped out real quick and the sales manager was none too happy. Story 73. Not specifying what the job is. I got hired for a job they said I didn't need to know anything I knew about and got fired after 2 weeks watching someone else work behind their desk LOL. Story 74. My last employer didn't check anyone's BA credentials or references. He just trusted our word. Mind you, I worked with underage asylum seekers. The whole year was chaotic from one thing to the next. Story 75. What church do you go to? Illegal to ask, but I can think of at least 5 interviews where it was asked. One time it was asked because the employer wanted me to be available on weekends, to doctor a supposed 8-5 job. The other time was religious nuts looking to hire only fellow religious nuts. Story 76. A story from Europe. I've just overheard a girl in the public transport during my daily commute. She is a student, went for a phone interview for a 20-hour-week position. The interviewer's first question was about her schedule. The girl said 20 hours per week is fine, she can be there. The guy's response, that is not enough. You have to be here more. It was listed as a 20-hour-week position. Second question, how long will you stay with us? Are you planning to get pregnant in the foreseeable future? The girl was around 20 years old. She said she could stay there for at least a year. After that, she will get her bachelor's degree. I wanted to interrupt to point out the red flags, but I didn't. Story 77. I was once asked if I intended to have children in the future, and then, do I suffer from bad periods? Story 78. Went to an interview. The manager interviewing me wasn't there yet, was told by staff to return an hour later as the manager will be arriving then. Ended up waiting another 30 minutes. After arriving an hour and a half late to the interview, the manager proceeds to explain to me over a 15-minute time period that they only accept perfection. Story 79. I once interviewed with L'Oreal for an amazing corporate job at their HQ in Manhattan. They told me if you only want to work 50 hours, this is not the place at all for you, implying 60, 70-hour work weeks minimum. They said it's very common to see people in the office who are usually still here around 8 p.m. As if that was some badge of honor. Sick shoot. I think most of those people were single and had cats. Prestige and glamour doesn't mean shoot. I withdrew as I really didn't want to finish in there. Story 80. Getting the job on the spot. Either they are desperate for someone or don't know what they need. Either way, you're walking into a toxic situation. Story 81. Lol. I had a cold call recruiting me to come work at a position I wasn't thrilled with, but could be fine with the right environment and pay. The guy started complaining about how much the guy leaving made BC. He didn't think the role was worth that much, and I told him I'm currently making more than the guy you're complaining about. I won't be taking that job. Story 82. I had an interview in a very sparsely marked or decorated office building. I asked the interviewer if they had just moved in, to which he replied, "Oh, I'm just borrowing this office temporarily to conduct interviews." I asked him if he always hangs his diploma on the wall in offices that aren't his. When he finally gathered his thoughts, he actually told me I'd be a perfect fit. It was a security job, since I was so observant. Then he started telling me how for only a $500 fee, I could get my security license through them and get a guaranteed job offer. I got up and left. Story 83. When they scream at you during the interview. I had this happen once, and the guy also thought he could have me do a tryout for the company and not pay if he didn't want to keep me. Story 84. Family business means we put ourselves first, you and your family are a second thought. When they end a labor's position interview with, "By the way, we don't pay overtime." When they ask, "Are you a Christian yet?" These are a few things I've seen experienced in interviews in my 50 years of working. Story 85. The owner of an antique jewelry shop in Brighton, England, compared himself to Jesus Christ. People persecuted Jesus and people persecute me. He then had the audacity to ask me why I was looking at him strangely. Story 86. As a woman, if there's a man interviewing you who interrupts you and doesn't let you finish your sentences. I worked for him for 8 months, and no, it never did get better. He would also tell me when I was getting a raise and would think it was a high honor to be making $14 an hour. It took previous employee a year to earn that wage. No, sir, you just don't value your employees. 14 hours isn't that much for skilled labor, and it doesn't come closer to what I made at previous jobs. Story 87. Today I ended up declining a job offer. They kept promising a salary of $50K. I merely asked them to put it in the contract, and they said no. Story 88. This actually happened to me at my first factory job. I worked at a Honda plant, but at the interview when they let us know if we got the job, a few things struck me a little funny. When I failed the written test, and two, I failed the color blindness test. So I definitely should not have gotten the job. In fact, they dropped a guy there who had actually worked there before and had experience. Red flag. But the biggest was when they handed me the paper telling me my position and time I needed to come in for my first day. The interviewer asked if we had any questions. I simply just asked, what does injection mean and what are my duties on injection? First factory job, so probably really stupid and nervous questions. And the woman, I swear, just stood and glared at me as if I just told her I kicked her puppy. It was so uncomfortable, but I should have known better than to fall for the any questions portion and should have just jumped ship because the 1 year I worked there was a total shoot show from start to finish. Fudge Honda. Story 89. We don't believe working 40 hours is really working. If you work that amount of hours, you're not doing enough. Most people here work at least 60 hours per week. Story 90. In college, I went to a job interview to be a waitress. The restaurant manager came into the room smiling and then took one look at me and frowned. As the interview went on, he eventually asked if I would be more comfortable in the back. He didn't even look at my resume. Like, I know I'm nothing special in the looks department, but he didn't need to make it so darn obvious. Story 91. Your scheduled interviewer is on vacation. Yes, somebody in corporate scheduled this interview with a manager, either without checking their availability or deciding they could just come back to interview a new underling. Then they asked me to fill out a paper application after I had filled out the online one. LMAO, no. Story 92. Team player, fast-moving, multitasking, family salary will be reviewed later, undefined flexible, performing these duties too, all indications of a shoot place and shoot job. Story 93. This is a fast-paced environment, aka we will work you to the bone as long as you let us and burn you out, then replace you. Story 94. Many years ago, I was looking at getting out of fast food management and thought about some kind of sales job. One of the companies liked me and wanted me to come on board. I asked about training and was told that I would be working with a senior salesman and we would call on my friends and family because I would be more at ease talking to them. Even as young as I was, I knew this was crap. They were hiring me as a source of leads and would have an increased chance of making the sales because I was there. If I had accepted the position, I would have finished training after all of my friends and family had been called. I've heard from friends through the decades since then that this is still going on. Story 95. I always ask what their staff turnover rate is, and the job I'm going for, why the person left. If they say the position is a merger of roles or will remain the same, high staff turnover, not good. Don't know the staff turnover bot, great. Merger of roles, fudge that. Story 96. Leadership saying anything about being a workaholic. You will not be allowed to have a work-life balance. Know this from experience, unfortunately. Story 97. My interviewer told me that I should not accept the job as a supervisor at a poultry processing plant during the facility walkthrough. I should have listened to him. Story 98. When they want you to take a timed logic and reasoning test, meaning I have a degree that proves my competence, so don't waste my time with your bullshit tests. Story 99. Me. What are the opportunities for career progression with this role over time? The HR person. Great question. That was the whole reply. Story 100. When the company mentions they are like a family here, just know, don't continue, save yourself and get out, don't work there, you have been warned. Story 101. Using a lot of buzzwords. I am a teacher, and when a principal is using a lot of buzzwords, I know that their school isn't actually accomplishing much. It means that they spend money on the latest certifications or methodologies. There is not an environment of teachers creating their own school community. Story 102. So I'm actually a hirer. Red flags I have personally are when someone hits every green flag of mine. We hire people who don't typically get hired. I interviewed a guy who, when I asked, how do you adapt to change, told me he was a Gemini. That answer was horrible, but I knew he was being honest with me, so I hired him. And he was great until he left. Story 103. I'm sure you'll fit well. Basically, bosses speak for, our employees are assholes. Not a red flag for me because that's what I am. But hopefully some of you can learn from this. Story 104. If they're unable to provide concrete responses to your questions about salary, schedule, location, some tech companies in my city have several buildings across the city, actual role responsibilities, etc. Story 105. You never know. They all run a different angle. Just keep your wits about you. Ask lots of questions, and if you detect them being evasive in answering any of the questions, well, you found your red flag. Story 106. Lol, once I had an interview with 10-15 candidates in the waiting room. I decided I would still be open-minded. Arrived a little early, etc., you know. Fast forward an hour and a half later, I went up and asked why my scheduled interview was taking so long, and I don't really remember the answer I was given, then waited another 20 minutes. I politely let them know I would be leaving and asked them to cancel my interview. I didn't make it halfway home, and the guy was very eagerly calling me, letting me know I was giving up a very big opportunity. Boy, bye. I guess I'll never know. Long story short, too many candidates and not honoring your scheduled interview time. No thanks. Story 107. I had a store manager that was interviewing me tell me, if I have to do all the work myself and fire everyone else, I will. I'm glad I didn't get the job. It was a Firestone service center. Story 108. When they are shoot-talking current employees in the interview, I've had that happen a few times, and I knew that was definitely not a place I wanted to be. Story 109. I once did an interview with Infinity Car for a sales position. 3 guys piled into the office and started asking me if I had a boyfriend and would he care if I got hit on a bunch of guys while selling cars. Also that they do cocaine sometimes and would I rat them out. They offered me the job and told me I had to do a substances test, but there's a smoke shop down the street that offered fake pee. Needless to say, I left and never went back. Ended up working at BMW, and let me tell you, it was the same shoot. Story 110. I applied to like Ross when I was 19. Showed up 5-15 minutes early, and they had me wait at the front of the store for the manager. Dude ended up being 20 miles late and seemed disinterested. I kind of knew that I didn't want to work there by that point, but dude ended up telling me to do some second round of the application process online. But I was like, fudge that. This is a Ross. Story 111. Do you have any children? They actually asked me that. I was 18 years old, interviewing for a clerk position. Story 112. When the manager took me for a tour of the place, not one of the 10 or so employees we encountered would look at him or acknowledge his presence. It was obvious that no one liked him. I was offered the job but noped out. Story 113. 2 flags. 1. Miserable person interviewing you? Run. I went to an interview with the regional manager of a large well-known company after I had a great interview with HR. She was grumpy and mean AF. She didn't make eye contact. She did the sell me this pen bit even though it was not a sales job. I walked out knowing I didn't get the job, and frankly I dodged a bullet if that woman was going to be my manager. 2. A disorganized office. Another interview I had was with a now-defunct mortgage company years before the credit crisis. The office was completely disorganized and the manager was some young person who looked like they didn't have a clue. Place was a mess. Files everywhere. I really thought the company was a scam. Story 114. Ask them what a good employee looks like, and they tell you it's somebody who wants to stay late. I get that it shows dedication, but out of the traits they can choose, that definitely shouldn't be at the top. Story 115. If they refer to the company and people in it as a family, just slang for overworked and underpaid. Story 116. When the company is so desperate that they don't ask you to have an interview, you say that you want to apply and they tell you to come in on Monday to start. Story 117. I was in an interview with the Egyptian company and they switched to they language between them and immediately told me the position is actually for 2 months from now, so we keep in touch. I was kind of sad, BC. I know that was a polite way to say that I didn't get the job, but later on I think working with someone who does that right in front of me would suck. Also, I am trans and I have no way to know if what they said is related to that, so not a safe environment for me anyway. Story 118. Had an interview for a kitchen job the other day. First thing the kitchen manager tells me is he's been there 3 weeks. Next thing he tells me is he has a lot of bad cooks. After that, he sees my XP as a manager and wants to make me a manager halfway through the interview. Reeked of desperation and dysfunction. Then with 6 days of open availability, needing Sundays off is a problem LMAIO. I stood up and apologized for wasting both of our time and walked out. LOL. Story 119. True story. A woman we were interviewing, when asked how she handled stress, she said lots of adult beverage. Later in the interview, her phone rang and she took the call. Never seen anything like it. Story 120. An employer making a comment about someone's, ESP the applicant, appearance, even if it's a compliment. I got a job simply because my boss wanted to have intimacy with me. Several months into the job, I found out about the ongoing intimacy harassment suit against him and my coworkers. He gets transferred and gets accused of violation at his next assignment. He now works for a college. Story 121. When they've worked for a lot of companies in a relatively short amount of time and apply to a place with an hour commute. Huge red flag. Story 122. While I was interviewing, another employee peeked in and asked the interviewer a question. The interviewer berated them, and the employee shrunk away. We then conducted the rest of the interview outside so he could smoke. This was right out of college, and this was for a mid-level position I was not yet qualified for. They called me for a second interview, and I said no. Story 123. We're a family, or if they don't mention pay rate before, or even during the first interview. Also, always ask how many people they're looking to hire. Pretend like you have friends also looking that would be suitable. If it's a high number and they jump at the mention, they probably have a very high turnover rate, usually for a good reason. Story 124. We think of our team more like a family than just a simple team. The part they don't say is where the family is one of those where the father hits everyone, one of the uncles is the intimacy offender, Granny is a rampant alcoholic, and siblings constantly fight to get approval from their father. Once someone says that on an interview, it's an instant no thanks. Being serious, it means tons of unpaid overtime. Bosses will keep all the credit for good stuff and throw you under the bus at first opportunity. Everyone is burned out and looking for a new place and don't expect to have vacations. Those are only for bosses, not for whoever is under them. Experience? 3 jobs once I got stranded in other state for S-Week because they didn't want to guy me money. Story 125. When the interviewer says, we're like a family here. In other words, get ready for toxic relationships, gaslighting, and exploitation. Story 126. Legal assistant here. Interviewed at a criminal defense firm, and the attorney made sure to point out that she drinks in the office and that the liquor cabinet is always well stocked. I did not join that firm. Story 127. No training onboarding plan. Manager isn't present. Your first day, no email setup or computer or desk. Story 128. When they ask you for an example of how you've gone above and beyond in your current previous job. Above beyond what? The job which I get paid to do per my job description? Story 129. If they are cagey about pay. Went through a 2-month interview process with a company during which I asked several times about pay and they wouldn't give me a straight answer. Finally, they told me, and it was well below standard. Story 130. We have unlimited vacation days. It's a fancy way of saying, yeah, we have unlimited vacation days, but good luck taking any time off. Story 131. Being made to wait 2+ hours past your appointment time. If they are that late in the interview stage, imagine how the company is organized. Story 132. Unpaid trials, particularly when applying for senior level jobs. Granted, I've only seen this become an issue recently, but with 5 years in management roles and visible proven experience, unpaid trials shouldn't even be in question. Story 133. Every town hall, my company's senior leadership always impose on our mindset things like stay hungry, always be better than yesterday, 247 be on the job, be 1 better than yesterday. Oh, and every time we hit the goal will always go higher and higher. Story 134. The interviewer barely asked me any questions, just talked about what a wonderful place it was to work for nearly an hour. Absolute worst job I ever had. Story 135. Don't tell that guy what job you're interviewing for. You're going to be his replacement after I fire him. Story 136. Informal chat turns out to be a group interview with practical exercises. Just about faced and walked out never to return. Story 137. One recent for me was the first question was about my last job and why it ended. Company layoffs. What have I done since was the follow-up. Geez, sorry, getting laid off as the holidays started was rough enough, but nobody was going to bother talking to me till at least January. I answered with a simple job hunting. Next question was what I was looking for in my next job. I gave a standard something that'll use my existing skills and allow for growth, was told. I think you should pursue that path, but this job is not that. Interview was 4 minutes long. Story 138. When you ask the interviewer what they like about working there, and they can't come up you an answer, or they say something really basic, like they sometimes provide lunch. Story 139. I had a guy come in to interview for a solar installer position once, 10:30 in the morning, and he had a can of Guinness in his hand. I don't know that they make red flags larger than that. Story 140. Don't worry, there will be lots of overtime to make up for the absurdly low wage. I got an offer on the spot but turned it down. Met someone else that worked there afterwards, and he confirmed that the woman I almost worked for was a complete psycho. Story 141. When the interviewer is so disorganized they pick up the wrong person's file and start asking questions meant for someone else. This happened to me, and when I asked him if maybe he had the wrong file, he looked at it, asked me what my name was, then got my actual file. No apology, he looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. Thankfully didn't get a call back. Story 142. When they don't mention the pay during the interview. As an example, okay, so do you have any questions? And then you would ask, oh yeah, what's the pay? Like, a lot of employers would then go mentioning like the values of the pay. However, a red flag would happen to be when they go, oh yeah, that's not important. Story 143. Having to go on a sales call during the interview for no pay and leaving the premises to continue the interview. And the interview lasts 3 hours. I was right out of college and felt so stupid afterwards. I turned down their job offer. Story 144. During the interview, he starts talking about how his employees are worthless and terrible and needed to be replaced. He seemed so apathetic about it, not even trying to play it off as a joke. I hid behind my customer service face and just rolled with it until I left. Cross that place off the list real quick. Story 145. I used to sit in on interviews at my old company, and my old boss was a piece of work. This girl was interviewing for a job, and her mom worked for the company, and my boss knew her mom. My boss told the girl she failed her substances test and kept it going for quite some time, asking if she ate poppy seeds. She was so upset and kept telling him it had to be a mistake. He just liked to watch people squirm. He used to ask, why are manhole covers round? And questions along those lines just to see what they would come up with. And he would actually base some of his hiring decisions on what they came up with to these pointless questions. I left that company shortly after. Story 146. The interviewer refuses to reschedule after you get food poisoning the day before, so they cancel the interview process. I wish I had gone and puked on his shoes to show I wasn't lying, but probably would have been accused of getting sick from drinking. Story 147. How flexible are your availabilities? Translation, you will be called in on short notice constantly and or required to be on call with no extra pay. Story 148. I once interviewed at a place where every single person I talked to mentioned how much fun they all had drinking together, with some people even drinking beer while talking to me. It was beyond bizarre, like they are purposely filtering on alcoholics. I drink my fair share, but no way I am going to that environment. Story 149. I like to ask, what would you change about your job, the organization? If they're open and honest, then there is trust there. When employees don't want to speak up, it signals they're not allowed to speak their minds. Story 150. One of my first interviews out of college. As soon as the interview started, the guy kicks back in his chair and puts his feet up on his desk, then proceeds to start bragging about how much money his company makes. The sad part is the company he owned was a residential treatment center for at-risk youth. I remember him saying, I can pretty much charge these families whatever I want. I knew right then I wasn't working for that boss. Story 151. This didn't happen to me, but a friend was challenged to a physical fitness contest by her interviewer. It was a credit card processing company, so completely unrelated to the job opening. Needless to say, it didn't go well from there. Story 152. Standard interview questions always makes me feel like the interviewer doesn't really know what they're doing. If they're asking you some detailed questions about the actual job and your ability to do said job, those tend to be better employers. Story 153. I have to add something. It seems a lot of these comments are from people who dislike sales jobs, which is fine. Sales definitely isn't for everyone or even most people. But I've been in sales for 15 years and I made $155K last year, tracking to break $200K this year. Commission-only sales jobs are one of the only ways a person with no college education can make that kind of money. I'm so glad that I took my first commission-only job in 2013. It has changed my life and given me and my son a comfortable life. My first recruit was a high school gym teacher who I recruited and trained. He made $95K his first year and is on pace for $125K plus this year, his second year. Based on the advice in the thread, he never would have taken the position. So I guess what I'm saying is that just because a position is commission only or requires more than 40-ish a week isn't necessarily a red flag. It just isn't what you want. Story 154. The employer asked me what I needed to improve most about myself. I didn't have an answer. It became clear after I left. I still got hired, but I knew then that communication skills were my biggest problem. Looking back, I'd definitely say my own inability to know my largest challenge was a red flag. Story 155. This company is like a family. No thanks. Got one of those? Call it what you want, but my family isn't trying to exploit my labor for their profits. Story 156. What's the lowest pay you'd take? We're like a family here. The only exception to this one was my first job ever. Ended up having to leave last year after 5 years because of personal issues, and now I'm back. They are basically my family. Story 157. Red flags I ignored and regretted. They had Fox News open in their browser, and they asked about my plans to have a family. Story 158. A more subtle one is if only one person in the interview does any talking. By the end of the interview, both parties should have a better idea what they're getting into. If it's just a straight interrogation and you don't have a clue what the job's going to be beyond what the posting said, that's not a great sign. If the interviewer barely shut up long enough for you to say, "Thank you for the opportunity," also not a great sign. I also really like the question, what do you do in your free time outside of work? It's one thing for one person to kind of shrug and mention something about Netflix. If no one can come up with a hobby, it means no one has free time because they're stuck at work during all daylight hours. Or they're parents of small children, but parents of small children will mention that. Story 159. If the word sales is mentioned anywhere in the job description, then sales will be your primary job and your number one focus, no matter what else the job description says. Story 160. I was told I needed to sign a waiver that I was okay not taking a lunch break. Better to finish work and go home early, right? Said in that kind of voice when you want a person to think a certain way. I had worked there before and enjoyed it, but it had drastically changed. I have it a try for a month, but that was the only job I have ever walked out on. Unsafe and hostile working conditions compared to the fun camaraderie I knew before. Most people didn't even know each other's names. Story 161. Based off of my recent application process, this 1. Asking me to come in for an interview, I ask what day and time. I get ghosted. 2. Being half an hour late to the interview. Twice that's not very boss babe of you. And then I get told I love your work. What's your availability? I get ghosted. My availability, MTWF and some sats. 3. Interviewing me over text at 11 p.m. on a weekday just to say, great, thanks. We've been overwhelmed with ad responses so ill, be in touch for an interview. 3 weeks later, they reach out wanting to interview. Clearly, your first candidates were awful, and I'm not second choice, considering I've been in this industry longer than you've been running your business. I'm overqualified, and you know it. Story 162. Had an interview where they asked, what sets you apart from the other applicants? Isn't that your job? How the hell would I know? I don't know any of the other applicants. I'm blonde. I know it's one of those standard questions, but I think it denotes a lazy interviewer. One who just asks corporate buzzword questions and maybe doesn't know what the job actually is. I actually told them I didn't want to work for someone who asked questions like that in interviews and took a different job. Story 163. They bragged about how many kegs are tapped at the same time. I do my best work with a good beer, Buzz was one interviewer's claim. Story 164. When you meet your future team and they are all giving you the "are you sure you want to be here?" vibes, happened to me a couple of times. Story 165. Non-disclosure agreement and confidentiality agreement, which stipulates that any inventions, modifications, or all other shite they document will be the company's property even after you leave that company. Looks like you are enslaving yourself and your next generation to an illegal agreement. Story 166. We have great work-life balance. The people here love their jobs so much, though, that they choose to come in and work on the weekends. Never again. Story 167. I was going to be starting grad school and I was looking for a full-time job to start around the same time because my classes would be at night. Went into a company that advertised the job as administrative work, but it was really a sales job that was closer to MLM sales job for guys. Everything about it was terrible, but I was getting desperate by that point. I was pretty sure I wouldn't take the job as my gut was saying no. This is a terrible job. But what sold my mind was when on the second interview, the manager asked if I would not go to grad school for the job. I turned down the offer right there. If a job ever asks you to either quit school or not go to school, you should run for the hills. They don't respect your life decision, and they won't respect your life period. Story 168. If they're comfortable being rude to you during the interview, they are going to be 10x worse when you work for them. Walk away. Story 169. During the interview, they forgot which position I had applied for because multiple people had quit at the same time. Story 170. When they hire you on the spot. My first process engineering job. I got the offer letter right there after my long jerk 3 HR interview. The worst job of my life. It usually means low worker retention, and there is something super wrong in the company. Story 171. From my recent interviews here were 2. Company stopped 401k contributions temporarily. Company has made this position have unlimited PTO. Both of those are signs that the company is not doing well financially. Story 172. This doesn't apply to entry-level jobs so much, but when they don't ask detailed questions about why you think you're a good fit for the position, unless you're undeniably a superstar, which most of us aren't. Story 173. I've had the occasional applicant introduce themselves with preferred pronouns, and that's an immediate hell no. They are HR nightmares to deal with, and everyone has to walk on eggshells around them. So I just saw steer clear. Story 174. I applied for a job at an adult foster home a few years ago, and I was asked how good I am at cooking. I was not applying to be a cook. I was applying to be a caregiver. I mentioned I'm relatively good, meaning I usually cooked for myself. I hardly qualify to be a chef. I don't even have a food handler's card because I was not looking for a cooking job. They proceeded to tell me they expected me to be a caregiver and a chef for this building full of at least 15 elderly folks for the same pay as caregiving alone. These are people who have diet restrictions, difficulty chewing and swallowing, and other issues that I absolutely was not prepared or trained to prepare food for. I was 19 and very anxious about conflict, so I just told the lady interviewing me that I smoke plant substance. Her smile instantly dropped and she just walked away from me, and a nearby nurse led me to the door. I then went home and proceeded to smoke the biggest bong rip that calmed my nerves after that uncomfortable experience. Story 175. Asking you to do homework after the interview so they can see your skills. I get that for some professions it's necessary. Like when hiring a teacher, professor, you might want to see them create a lesson plan. But in my field, it's not necessary when they can just ask for a normal portfolio. I skipped out on an opportunity because they wanted me to make a week's worth of work, which they'd probably turn around and steal if I didn't get the job. X200B, I also don't take kindly to being asked my current salary because 1110, they'll try to short you. Story 176. I went to a job interview for the county. It was an accounting job, and I was a bit overqualified for position. I was brought to an office which had 3 women sitting down. They were Black, Hispanic, and Asian, and the Asian lady had tissue stuck up her nose. There was no greeting or handshake. I was told to sit by the Asian lady, which was flanked on each side by the 2 other ladies who had arms crossed and looked totally disinterested. So the first comment out of the Asian lady's mouth, who was holding in her shots with the tissue jammed in, was, "You do know this is a diversified workplace?" The 2 on the side now gave me a side look. I forgot to mention I'm a 6-foot white guy. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "Great." It was all downhill from there, where they just kept asking me why did I apply. I didn't get the job. I don't know if the tissues were red flag or the diversity comment. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care. What's your most unethical life hack? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.